1 point. Sabrina Ionescu played a complete WNBA preseason game today at Barclays Center in Brooklyn and finished with 1 solitary point on 0 made field goals. Not 1 quarter, not 1 half. The entire game. And the player sharing the court with her? Hadn't touched a WNBA floor in 9 months, stepped onto enemy territory in Brooklyn, and within 2 minutes had scored the opening basket and buried a 3 from 29 feet. Welcome back, Caitlin Clark. This league was not prepared for what today looked like. The Indiana Fever and New York Liberty locked up for the first game of the new year. And for every fan who had been counting down the days since July 15th of last year, when Clark was shut down with a groin strain and the 2025 season effectively ended before it ever really started, nothing else on the schedule mattered. But if the scoreline is your only takeaway, you missed the entire story. Because underneath that dominant team performance sits a subplot so stunning that it is going to shape the conversation around this rivalry for the next 3 months. Sabrina Ionescu, 1 point, 0 field goals. Against a team playing without 3 of its regular rotation players. Against a Caitlin Clark operating on a deliberate minutes restriction in her first competitive game back from injury. If you have been waiting 9 months for this moment right along with us, and we know most of you have, hit that like button right now. Let's make sure this story reaches every basketball fan who deserves to see it. To understand what today actually meant, you have to go back to what the last year and a half actually cost Caitlin Clark. Because the numbers tell a story that most people have not fully processed. In 2045, Clark suffered 4 separate muscle injuries. 4 in a single season: quad, groin, ankle, then the groin again, each one landing at the worst possible moment, each one pulling her off the floor just as she was finding rhythm. The result was a sophomore season reduced to 13 games, 13, when the entire league was watching to see whether her rookie explosion was a fluke or the beginning of something historic. Here is what makes those 13 games so extraordinary in retrospect. She still averaged 16.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 8.8 assists per appearance, earned a second consecutive All-Star selection, showed flashes between the setbacks through the frustration despite the limitations that reminded everyone exactly why the networks wrote those broadcast checks. The talent was never the question. When Clark showed up to spring camp and declared herself fully recovered, the cautious version of you heard an athlete doing what athletes always do, saying the right things, but the people inside that camp reported something more specific than generic positivity. They reported sharpness, timing, lateral burst, the kind of explosive first step in court instinct that physical therapy alone does not restore, that only comes from a body that has genuinely healed, genuinely rebuilt, and genuinely found itself again. When those reports filtered out, the cautious optimism in the fan base shifted towards something closer to certainty, and today it became confirmation. Clark wasted no time. Indiana's very first possession of the 20-tights preseason, she drove into the lane and laid in a floater. Not a safe pull-up, not a conservative mid-range look. A floater attacking downhill on the first touch of the year. 2 possessions later, she stepped all the way back to 29 feet and buried a 3. The crowd at Barclays Center, Sabrina Ionescu's home gym, enemy territory, erupted anyway. Because that is what Clark does to a room. She changes the energy of a building regardless of whose fans paid to be in it. Indiana flew out to an 8-0 run before New York found their footing, and even after Breanna Stewart went absolutely nuclear to open the second quarter, 10 straight personal points, completely erasing Indiana's lead and giving the Liberty the advantage at 46-39, the Fever never looked right. That belief to fold when their best player was sitting on the bench managing her minutes, is the most important development story coming out of today's game. Kelsey Mitchell wrote the first chapter of that story herself. Mitchell, who signed a $1 million contract with the Fever this offseason, the first player in Indiana Fever franchise history to reach that number, stepped up in the exact moment when the game was on the line and Clark was unavailable. 10 straight Indiana points, step back 3, driving layup, pull-up jumper, pure competitive will, from a player who spent the entire offseason proving she deserved that investment. Indiana went into halftime leading 53-48, and the message was delivered clearly. This Fever team was built to win even when Caitlin Clark is watching from the bench. The third quarter extended that advantage with Clark continuing to manage her workload, and what unfolded in those 10 minutes was a legitimate showcase of the roster depth that head coach Stephanie White has spent 2 years constructing. Caitlin Cunningham, returning from the torn Meckel that ended her own 25 season, nailed a 3. Tiffany Timmons hit a step-back jumper off an assist from Raven Johnson, the first-round pick making her professional preseason debut. And then Johnson herself, operating in the offense with a poise that looked completely unreasonable for a player stepping onto an NBA court for the very first time, kept distributing, kept the engine running, Johnson finished with 6 points and 8 assists in 17 minutes, 8 assists in 17 minutes, 8 assists from a rookie in a debut against the New York Liberty. If those numbers do not make you excited about the next decade of this franchise's backcourt, you are not paying close enough attention to what Indiana has quietly assembled around its superstar. Then came Deisha Fair Walker-Kimbro, who may have been the most impressive individual performer in a game full of impressive individual performances, matching Mitchell with 18 points and adding a team-high 8 assists from the reserve role. Walker-Kimbro was the player who transformed Indiana's comfortable lead into an overwhelming one. A cutting layup, a free throw, a three-pointer, a running layup off a Johnson assist to push the lead to 23. The Liberty bench had no answer for any of it. The fourth quarter became formality. Pierce buried back-to-back threes. Walker-Kimbro hit a 28-footer to push it further, and by the time both benches started emptying, the game had been decided for nearly 8 minutes. Indiana cruised to 109-91, never allowing New York to get within 10 points in the fourth quarter. 17 minutes, 7 points on 2, 4, 10 shooting, 3 rebounds, 4 assists will be the number the casual observers fixate on. She would be the first to say the shot wasn't where she needs it. But evaluating her return by field goal percentage alone is like evaluating a quarterback's first game back from shoulder surgery by completion rate on deep balls. The movement was right, the instincts were there, the floater, the 29-foot three, the effortless distribution. Those moments told you everything about her health that a shooting percentage cannot capture. And while Clark was re-establishing her foundation, the teammate who played opposite her in the most discussed subplot of this entire game was quietly having the worst afternoon of her professional career. Sabrina Ionescu had 1 point. The full story of why that number carries so much weight is exactly where we need to go next. Here is the part that the mainstream recaps are going to gloss over, because it requires context that a simple box score cannot provide. Ionescu's 1-point performance today was not just a bad individual game. It was the latest data point in a pattern that the basketball community has been quietly tracking since Caitlin Clark entered this league in 2024. Whenever the spotlight is at its absolute brightest, whenever the narrative of the moment centers on Clark, whenever the matchup carries the weight of a rivalry, the entire sport is watching. Ionescu has repeatedly faded into the background at precisely the wrong moment, and the results are becoming impossible to explain away with circumstance alone. We want to know what you think. Drop a comment below right now. Is today's Ionescu performance a situational anomaly, or is there something more systemic happening every time she steps onto the court opposite Clark? The thread in those comments is going to be the most interesting conversation in the WNBA community this week, and we'll be reading every single one. She led all scorers with 20 points in a genuinely strong all-around performance. Kayla Thornton-Mailey had 13 points and 6 rebounds in her WNBA rookie debut. Zia Cook-Gardner chipped in 11. The Liberty as a collective were not a disaster. They were a shorthanded team on the first day of preseason, showing the predictable rustiness of a squad still finding its legs, which is precisely why Ionescu's line stands out so starkly. You cannot hide 1 point behind a team's injury report when the rest of that same team was playing respectably. You cannot point to rust when Stewart looked sharp and Miley looked ready in her first professional game. The excuse structure simply does not hold when you apply it specifically to Ionescu's afternoon, and the WNBA community is smart enough to recognize that. Go back to the Clark-Ionescu dynamic over the previous 2 seasons and the pattern holds. In the games that mattered most, the games where the stakes were defined by Clark's presence and the media attention followed, Ionescu consistently produced below her own established standard, while Clark consistently elevated. Clark's viral step-back threes against the Liberty, the games where Indiana, by every metric an underdog on paper, competed and won because Clark refused to allow otherwise. The narrative that today's headline is referencing is not a story invented in the last 24 hours. It is one that has been accumulating for 2 full years, and today's performance added its most glaring chapter yet. Before we continue, if our coverage has been your go-to source for what's actually happening beneath the surface of this league, consider joining the channel as a member. Your support is what makes it possible to keep going deeper on stories like this one, the ones that require context and history rather than just a box score and a hot take. Now let's pull back from the individual matchup entirely, because what today's game revealed at the structural level is bigger than any rivalry. Every single Indiana Fever game in the 2026 WNBA season airs on national television. Abete Espaniensetzen, Ondete Espaniensetien, is not routine for Peacock. That broadcast arrangement is not routine for VHF. That is a statement from every major American network simultaneously declaring that Caitlin Clark has moved beyond women's basketball and entered a category of cultural relevance that demands uninterrupted access. To find a comparable broadcast footprint for a single player in a team sport, you have to go back to the Chicago Bulls dynasty run of the 1990s, when network executives made similar calculations about a player who was changing what their sport could charge for its games. The parallel is uncomfortable for the people who resist it, but the ratings, the attendance figures, the merchandise numbers, and the sponsorship data are not interested in anyone's discomfort. The financial architecture underneath today's game extends further than the WNBA's current collective bargaining agreement, now in its second operational year, was negotiated directly against the backdrop of Clark's arrival and its demonstrated impact on the league's revenue capacity. Minimum salaries increased. Maximum salaries increased. The charter flight standard that players had fought for across multiple CBCCs became reality. Every player who signed a contract at a higher number than she would have received before 2024, every player who boards a charter flight rather than a commercial connection, benefits from the economic argument that Clark made possible simply by being extraordinary enough to transform what a women's basketball broadcast deal was worth. Whether that is acknowledged publicly or not depends on the player. The math, however, does not change based on who acknowledges it. That context reframes what the boss narrative in today's headline actually means. It is not really about Sabrina Ionescu as a person or even as a basketball player. Ionescu is one of the most gifted guards in this sport and will have performances this season that remind everyone of that. If you have been sending this channel to basketball fans who are still sleeping on what the WNBA has become, people who have not tuned in yet, share this video right now. The regular season tips off May 8th, and every Fever game is on national television. Nobody should be the only person in the room who was not watching. The question driving every conversation between now and opening night is, what does a healthy Caitlin Clark in a full 40 minutes, a night role, actually produce in 2026? Her 17-minute, 7-point preseason line answers exactly nothing about that question, and that is a feature, not about. Preseason minutes are about feel, about movement, about confirming the body responds the way the mind expects. 4-10 shooting in a controlled return game does not project onto what 16.5 points and 8.8 assists per game looks like when she is playing full minutes against a team that has to guard her in every possession of a real game. Mitchell at $1 million is a bargain, if today is a preview, because Clark's gravity opens the floor for the drives and step-backs that Mitchell converts at the highest rate in that building. Walker-Kimbro, as a high-usage reserve with 18 points and 8 assists, is a luxury that most franchises in this league would structure an entire offensive game plan around. Cunningham hitting 3 of her 6 three-point attempts in her Meckel comeback game is the confidence-building performance she needed. The confidence build and Raven Johnson, 8 assists in 17 debut minutes, operating with the decision-making of a third-year player, may be the most quietly significant addition Indiana made this offseason, precisely because her impact does not show up on a highlight reel, but does show up in how every other Fever player's offensive game is about to get easier. The Liberty will be back. She is too talented, too experienced, and too central to New York's championship ceiling to contribute 1 point in any competitive context, preseason included. The fan discourse across X and Reddit following today's result has been dominated by exactly that question, whether the psychological weight of operating in Clark's era, in Clark's spotlight, has settled somewhere in Ionescu's game in a way that shows up at the worst moments. That is fan speculation, and it deserves to be labeled as such. But it exists, it is loud, and it is going to be the undercurrent running beneath every Fever Liberty matchup this season. Here is what we know with certainty after today. Clark is healthy and moving right. Her team is deeper than it has ever been. The entire country has a front-row seat on national television. And the league that Clark has rebuilt from a niche product into a national conversation now has the stage it has always deserved. The franchises that figure out how to compete in that environment will thrive. The ones that shrink in the spotlight, as we watched one of the sport's most recognizable stars do today, are going to find that the gap between potential and performance gets harder to explain with every game that passes. May 8th is the real beginning, but after what we saw today at Barclays Center, the rest of this league already knows what is coming. The rest of this league already knows what is coming. The only question still standing is whether anyone in it has what it takes to stop. If you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now, because Indiana's opening night is right around the corner, and we will be here breaking down every angle, every revelation, and every storyline that the box scores leave on the floor. The 2026 WNBA season is here. Clark is healthy. The Fever are ready. And from everything we saw today in Brooklyn, this league is about to find out exactly how far the gap has grown.